I thought I'd just run a quick poll to see where everyone's at, just to give us an idea of where people, what stage people have got to, and also just timings as well, because that might aid Matthew in how he tackles some of your questions. So you should have a couple of questions that have just popped up on your screen. It should just take a couple of seconds to pick one of those multiple choice answers. It's completely anonymous, so we can't see who has answered what. It just gives us an idea of what stage everyone's at. Okay, so there's some mixed answers here. I'll give a last few seconds for the final voters, and then I'll put the results up so everyone can have a look. It's a very mixed bag for question 2, so let's just share these results with you. So, as expected, big chunk of respondents have 100% of staff working from home. But some of my conversations over the last few weeks seem to show that people have got very small groups of staff going in on a voluntary basis because they can't work from home for whatever reason. And actually the second question reflects a lot of the conversations I've had over the last week about that early September being the plan. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Matthew. How do those results compare with what you're hearing, Matthew?
So yeah, very interesting actually, from a leadership perspective, because generally I'm seeing the opposite, but I'm getting lots and lots of inquiries through. So no, it is interesting that they're happy for that to be staggered. And it will be interesting to see what the reality of that looks like, because the closer we get to October and January next year, we're actually going to be smack bang in the middle of a second wave. And it's highly likely lockdown scenarios, and the offices won't be able to be moved into anyway. So it may be, for some people, it will be later than that. But yeah, in general, it does look as though it's around sort of 50-50 of now and then for next year. Interesting.
And what, in terms of the questions that you're guessing at the moment, what stage are companies generally at, and is it still the kind of early risk assessment stage that most firms seem to be at?
If at that, if at that level, what I'm finding is the bulk of the businesses that I'm speaking to, and obviously the ones who are contacting me, are looking for a little bit of support. So this is going to be slightly biased towards those kinds of businesses. It's where they start with the risk assessment, because the risk assessment, and I've now got a copy of a risk assessment, which I can show if anybody wants a consultation after this about their business, what they need to do, especially those ASAP ones on the poll. 100% speak to me this week, either today or tomorrow or possibly Friday. I'll tell you what you need, because the risk assessments, the average risk assessment for an office, for everything, slips, trips, manual handling, COSH, the average risk assessment for an office is around 6 to 7 pages long on average. The average COVID-19 risk assessment for an office, just COVID, is around 10 pages long. And I know we've explored some of these arenas before, such as you have to take into account the full journey coming into work, the fact staff are going to have to wear masks and be supplied masks. There's so many things. So yeah, I'm finding that a lot of businesses are either doing their risk assessment and it's a couple of pages long and it's inadequate and they're looking for a check, but the bulk of the ones I'm dealing with, they've got so far down the rabbit hole now, and I understand this, they don't know where to stop checking, because ultimately you've got to look at everything people can touch. So I'm getting a lot of phone calls saying, listen, this risk assessment is 7 pages long now. Is that normal? Should I continue? We're exploring what's in there, and quite often, yeah, there's a lot of information missing. Unfortunately, the HSE aren't forthcoming with anything, because if your business has more than 5 staff, they expect you to have someone already in the company who knows how to handle all of this, which who does? Who's got people who are experts in pandemics working for their business right now? So that's going to be their approach to this. And there was a very interesting article, press release, in fact, from the health and safety executive. And there was 4 bullet points on this that really hit home for me. And I think this is where any business really, really needs to take note. So the HSE Director of Regulation has said that becoming COVID secure should be the priority of all businesses. And it's interesting language that they're using, because this is all leading to something. Inspections are ongoing, and intelligence is being gained via site visits, phone calls, photos, and video footage. They've invested £14 million into a whistleblowing campaign. So social media, radio ads, all sorts of things saying, basically, do you feel safe at work? If not, ring this number. So inspectors, and this is the scary bit for me, because they've never made when I say scary, incidentally, since the Health and Safety Act of 1972 came out, they've never made a statement like this one. Inspectors are out and about, putting employers on the spot and checking that they are complying with health and safety law, not just COVID, but health and safety in general. And all sectors and businesses of all sizes are in scope. So I think the plan is, and they've spelt this out very clearly, so no one can say I didn't know this was going to happen. They're saying, get yourselves COVID secure now, because we are going to do a spot check and we are going to fine you. That's ultimately what they're saying. So there is a lot of confusion out there right now. My phone is off the hook because they made this announcement. And then on Saturday, and this is going to answer quite a lot of questions for a lot of people in this forum, you can now go back to the office. They've completely U-turned on that. My predictions of still sitting here at Christmas, long blown out of the water. You can go back to the office tomorrow, as long as you are socially distancing, as long as everybody is 2 meters apart. That's going to effectively now be the new golden rule.
And can you just clarify, because I've been confused about this. I mean, we've set up our own office so that desks are all 2 meters apart. And is that still, since the 1 meter plus thing, does 2 meters still apply inside businesses?
It's a really interesting one, because the media have got better now at 1 meter plus, because at least they have now finally started saying 2 meters or 1 meter plus with mitigating circumstances. So what those mitigating circumstances are is you've got to have something to barrier the infection. So if 2 meters is impossible, there's no reason why it wouldn't be impossible, but if 2 meters is impossible and you've got 2 members of staff sitting at less than 2 meters, they've got to have a mask on. One way around it, actually, that we've been introducing, and this has worked very well for small offices, is having people back to back.
Yeah, that's what we've done.
Yeah, which is a good way of doing it. And, you know, that's ultimately the only way you can get around it. Ensuring everyone's had the correct training. And this is the big one, actually, that training is recorded. So when you're training your staff about washing their hands, about not hugging people, about how they're supposed to be making cups of tea on their return, about not using the lift, about the journey that they're taking, that it's a disciplinary offence if they get caught not wearing a mask on the tube, all these different things, the training of that must be physically recorded. So if the HSE say, we want to see what that person's been told, you've got to be able to produce it. So getting everything in place is fantastic. And I think a lot of people are getting there now. The second thing where we're seeing people just be exposed to claims ultimately is not recording the training. That's the more problematic area now.
No, that's a good point. And I think that's certainly not something that I've had in my conversations with companies over the last couple of weeks. They've all gone through their risk assessment quite thoroughly, but because no one's been physically in, I don't think anyone's had the training yet. So
yeah.
And what's a reasonable way of recording that? Does it need to be a signed document or?
No, when I say record, I mean record. So the video or audio, the instructions they've been given have to be crystal clear, and you need to demonstrate they've understood it. So there's 2 core ways you can do it. You either have everybody in a room socially distanced and you set up a video camera, or you do it like this, webinar training. So the whole content
have it recorded.
You can see who's attended. That's how we do it. We've gone a step further, because everyone has to watch a video essentially before they go back into work. It's a COVID-19 training course. So we've produced one where you watch the course. It's actually interesting. You learn a lot about COVID-19 and the spread, because a lot of naysayers, a lot of these people who don't care about, you've got 3 groups in this. You've got the group who are just complying with what they're being told, which is most of us. You've got the groups who are saying, I don't really care. It's just like the flu. No one's going to die. It's just like a bad summer flu. I'll give you the stats for that in a moment. And then you've got the people absolutely terrified of coming into work. So you've got to try and find the balance. So with the training, for those people who think it's nothing, this is going to actually set them in a much different path and show them how hard it is to contain this virus because of how sticky it is, why washing hands is so important, why you've got to wash with hot water as opposed to cold water, things like that. But then for those people who are terrified of coming back into work, the same training video is also demonstrating that if you are doing these things, such as washing hands, you are staying 2 meters apart from people, actually the risk of infection is incredibly low, like super, super low. And that's going to help put a lot of people's minds at rest. But it's at the end of that, we've taken it a step further where we will ask people questions. And we have to do this because we can see what's coming. We ask people questions on their understanding of the course. They complete a couple of questions. A certificate is then printed to say they've completed their COVID-19 course. And it means they'll never, ever in the future be able to make a claim against that company for their life being put at risk, because anybody who cannot produce the record of that training will be absolutely liable to a claim of that nature. They happen now already all the time under very different circumstances. So a webinar or just a good old fashioned video, you know, phone
recording, yeah.
You just need a record of what was said and who was there.
So I'm just going to start. Well, I think you've got these questions as well, Matthew, but I thought we've covered a couple of them actually. So someone's asked about the serviced office setting, how a company's finding this impacts on the return to work plan, given that we have less control over certain shared facilities, kitchens, meeting rooms, etc.
Yeah, so when you're doing the risk assessment, any area where your staff are going to go through must be taken into account, whether it's your responsibility or not. So when it comes to managed offices, the easiest way of doing this is to get their COVID-19 risk assessment and training for their communal areas. It's going to be impossible for you to do yours without theirs, because unless you know what they've put in place, you can't respond and do that as well. So sadly, because of this, there is now more responsibility than less in those communal areas for employers in managed offices.
I mean, we're with Landmark, a serviced office, and they've kept the communal areas open, but with they've physically marked out all the areas. They've removed all the classic touch points, the microwaves, the coffee machine, etc. And I think other than that, there's the kind of one-way route through the corridors, only one person in the lift. We've got screens obviously up at the main reception. And I think that covers all the kind of common routes that we pass through. But I think quite a few people are having the same issues. So the key point is to get that risk assessment from your landlord, from your serviced office.
Yeah, because the thing is with that, and we're not going to know until the first test cases come through what will and won't be classed as unlawful. But where we're seeing issues already when it comes to elevators and lifts is, unless you've got someone at the top of that lift, whatever floor that person gets off on, to then jump in the lift and wipe down the buttons after someone has touched it, stopping that infection from spreading is going to be very limited. So for anyone we're working with, apart from very certain circumstances, disabilities, etc., everyone's got to be taking the stairs.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying that's wrong, incidentally. I'm just saying that it can be open to claims without the mitigating circumstances. So if people have got like some spray in there and a wipe, and there's a big sign up saying wipe the buttons when you're finished, and you've recorded the training for that, not a problem. It really is sort of a no man's land at the moment from a health and safety perspective.
So the next question is kind of related to that about cleaning, legal obligations the company has when it comes to cleaning the office, especially now during the pandemic.
Yeah.
What do you need to be able to prove that you've been doing from a cleaning perspective?
So in a nutshell, you have to clean every single touch point in between people touching them. And you have to be able to demonstrate that you have got a system in place to do that.
And that's door handles, door edges, door
handles, light switches, toilets, the flush in a toilet, kettles, Anything, yeah, absolutely. And this is why they go pages and pages long, because lots of different officers have got lots of different touch points. People don't think of certain things, you know, which is fair enough. Things like the car park have to be taken into account. The fact that if they are coming in on public transport, the risk assessment needs to state you're going to have people coming in riddled with it. They're going to have more security measures. So you'll have to tell those people as part of their training, they must wear a face mask on the tube. Not doing so is actually putting the people in work. Technically, I don't make these rules, but technically that puts them in danger.
Yeah.
At risk if you've not asked them to do that. So I think knowing what your responsibilities are and how far you can go with them is something that a lot of employers are missing. I don't think they realise just how much power they actually have under these new health and safety laws.
So I'm just keeping an eye on the chat box because questions come in that's connected to this. So is it sufficient to have a sign by the coffee machine asking people to wash their hands before using it? Or does it need to be physically wiped down?
It should be both, really. Hands should be washed and the coffee should be wiped down. That's the easiest way. But that also would need to be in some form of recorded training. So if it's solely just a poster next to that, then sadly that wouldn't be adequate. But yeah, if people wash their hands before and after and wipe it down as well, that's going to be fine.
Oh, there's lots of questions coming in. I've heard quite a few companies talking about fogging and the benefits of doing this. I mean, is that going to solve any of these touch point issues ultimately, or is that?
No, only once, because with touch points, it's about what happens in between.
Yeah.
So some, and that's why some communal areas in some of these offices now are just completely out of bounds, because you can't police that. You can't do it in between, sadly.
And then
frogging clean. I've not heard of frogging clean before.
Fogging, I think, is the term. So someone's asked, are companies legally obliged to provide some form of temperature screening on arrival, and are they obliged to provide PPE for their employees?
If, as part of their job, it is likely that they're going to be going on things like public transport and stuff, at this point they are not obliged to give PPE, but we would strongly and highly recommend it. Because if you don't, that person could say, I didn't know how important it was and things like that, but there's no legal obligation right now for the masks. Because I meet clients face to face as part of my job, I've been sent a mask from Peninsula that I have to wear when I'm out and about. Sorry, what was the second part to
that? Temperature screening. Is there an obligation to do temperature screening on arrival?
It's not a legal obligation, but it is very, very good practice. A simple rule of saying if you have a temperature, so putting the onus back onto the employees. If you have a temperature, don't come in. If you've got any of these symptoms, please don't come in. So again, no legal obligation for screening temperature on entry, but it's very good practice. Very good. Just from a practical level, if we forget, with some of the things I'm going to talk about, some of it is box ticking and it avoids prosecution, but actually a lot of this, health and safety, on a practical level, it's going to stop the infection spreading in your office. So you're not going to have people at home self-isolating for 2 weeks. You're not going to have people who may or may not have it. You're not going to have people with genuine cases because it's spread. So just on that practical level, putting these things in place, as sort of tiresome as it is at the beginning, it's going to actually help things so much more efficiently, especially, as I say, as we get closer to winter and the real problems with this virus starts, because we haven't seen what this virus is capable of yet. We've had a trailer, essentially, in the summer.
Yeah. And especially in the colder temperatures. And there's been a couple of questions around the timing of the risk assessment. So if you've not got staff physically back in the office at the moment, can this wait until the point where you are ready to bring people back, or would you recommend that there's a kind of almost draft version done, so that anything that needs to be implemented, rebuying screens or different cleaning regimes?
Yeah. So again, this is going to boil down to best practice. If you know you are going to open before Christmas, or you want people back in before Christmas, do the risk assessment now. It's long anyway. It takes a good couple of days to complete. If people can go in and do it in half a day, they haven't got everything that they need in there. It really is a complex, long document. So once they've got all of that information in place, hopefully when they do come to open, maybe in a month or so, there isn't going to be too much more legislation on top of that. And what would be nice, although unlikely, is maybe some of that legislation relaxed slightly. I don't think we'll ever get to 1 metre without the mitigating circumstances until that there's some sort of a vaccine to this. So I think we're always going to be looking at that now, but there will be more and more creative ways, such as back-to-back and things like that, that are certainly going to help. So yeah, do the risk assessment now if you know it's going to happen this side of Christmas, because you're going to have to do it anyway sooner.
And then someone's just put into the group, once that risk assessment has been done, does it need to be checked or signed off in any way? Like, does this need to be submitted to the health and safety executive? Does it need to be stored in a certain way? Does it need to be visible or accessible to people?
Yeah, so the HSE have said it has to be published, which effectively means it's just got to be in a readily available document. So you don't have to have it up on the wall or anything like that. You just need to know where it is. So if an employee asks to see a copy, you can do so. It's very rare that happens, incidentally, that they ask to see a copy of the risk assessment. But if there's a spot check, it's the first thing the HSE are going to ask for. And sort of with that, what people need to bear in mind with the HSE is it doesn't matter how good it looks inside the office. You know, I could be driving my vehicle very safely and correctly, but if they pull me over and I don't have any license or insurance, because it's criminal law, they have to go off the documentation that I don't have. So yeah, that risk assessment needs to be signed off by either the competent person in the business or preferably the director, because the only person allowed in a business before the staff have had the training for health and safety is the director. No other employee should be even stepping foot into a business before that risk assessment is done. So it should be signed off by the director or competent person and then stored readily available for anyone who asks for it.
What protocol should you engage or employ if employees do not want to return or travel in on public transport? So this is if you've mandated the office being open.
Yes.
What if employees do not want to travel?
So it's an HR issue at the end of the day. It's conduct, and it's going to come under any sort of conduct issue. It would be no different to, let's pretend COVID didn't exist. If employees just suddenly start saying, I don't want to use public transport to come in anymore, it'd be a serious problem. So once you've done the training and the reassurance that they're going to be fine, you've got two choices. You can either continue to pay them and let them sit at home and rule it, or say, actually, no, other people have come into the office. This is what we're doing. We're trying to get back to normal as efficiently as possible. So if you don't come back in, sadly, we are going to have to give you a verbal warning. If you continue to not come into work, we are going to have to take further disciplinary action. It needs to be done from the offset to the first person who does it. Otherwise, you're going to create a precedent. You're going to create what's called an implied term, which means if you let one person in the office do that, you have to let all the others. So it's really important. The first person who does that, you push back, and you push back hard. And if anyone wants some support or advice in respect of that, because everybody in this forum, I would be very surprised if you do not get that kind of pushback. Yeah. Contact me or contact Jen, and she can put us in touch to have a further chat about some practical things you can do.
I mean, pretty much every office I've spoken to has had at least one member of staff say something along the lines of, you know, well, I live with someone who's shielding, or you know, there's some other logistical reason why they can't return to work. So this is definitely a common theme that's coming up.
Yeah, it's the most asked question we're getting. So our phone line gets around 2,000 phone calls a day. And that's one of the most common things that we're being asked. I've got this person and they're just refusing point blank to come to work. They're just saying they don't feel safe yet. Or that's another one. They live with someone who's been shielded. They've relaxed the rules on shielded people now. You know, that's slowly coming into effect, where they can spend more time out and about with other people. So once they've had the training, and half of this is about reassuring them. So we've got some fantastic courses for managers on how to boost staff morale, on how to get people back into the office, how to recalibrate them. It's bad enough when people have been off for 2 weeks at Christmas, you know, getting someone to not talk for half an hour over at the coffee machine. We'll try doing that when people haven't seen each other for 3 or 4 months. So we can't just reopen the office and say, okay, everyone back to normal. We're going to have to train managers to train their staff on how to be normal again in this new normal. So there's a lot to it. Now, once you've gone through that, that's when disciplinary action can begin. Otherwise, it's not going to be seen to be giving someone a fair chance. But all of that can be done very, very quickly.
Matthew, on that note, that's great, because you started talking about that the moment a question about training came up. Obviously just connected with our audience. Does Peninsula also offer training for, like, would you come in and deliver the training for the staff, or does it have to be via the management that you train and then they disseminate?
It's going to be both. So the management are going to send a link for our training course to all the staff that they're responsible for who need that training. So they're going to oversee it. The training is going to be webinar based like this. It's predominantly going to be a pre-recorded video, so they can watch it in their own time. They can answer the questions, have that certificate produced. And the moment you've got that, that person can now come back into work.
Thank you.
So Peninsula do offer that. That's good to hear.
We offer, so as part of sort of what we do, because we just have this set model at Peninsula. It's a bit like a mobile phone. You choose how long you want your contract to be. You have a monthly fee, and then it's literally all you can eat for that entire term. We offer training for all employees for anything that comes under the Health and Safety Act 1972. So the average office employee needs around 5 to 10 different kinds of training courses on induction, and every 2 to 3 years. So if you know in your office you're not giving regular training to people for slips and trips, working from heights, COSH, manual handling, and when I say working from heights, grabbing something from above you on a shelf requires working from heights training, otherwise that's a £10,000 claim if something falls on your head. So yeah, so making sure that that's in place. So now we cover all of that in a series of webinars, because we can prove what has been said when a judge asks us to.
Okay. Someone's asked quite an interesting one here. Does the health and safety competent person have to be in the office at all times? And if they're not there, who does someone else need to be assigned to have that role to keep an eye on people behaving?
So again, there's no test cases yet to sort of pin this on, but what we would suggest as good practice is whoever is most likely to be in the office with some sort of management responsibility is the better competent person, because it's not, if the competent person's not in the office and you have a crisis, someone falls down some stairs or something happens, you've not actually got anybody on site to deal with it. And although that's not a criminal offence, the health and safety executive won't be happy, and they will impose some sort of additional fine for not having that circumstance mitigated. So you're not breaking the law, but it's also not good practice. You should really have somebody on site that is classed as competent at all times. And for that reason, we'll make as many people competent in the business as need to be. So usually most businesses have one competent person. The businesses I work with typically have 3. So if someone's on holiday, someone's off sick, they've still got at least one competent person in the company. And on the days where there is an accident or someone's got to go to hospital, it really, really pays off having someone who knows exactly what to do.
Yeah, that ties into another question about the protocol if someone is in the office experiencing symptoms, and what has to happen at that point.
So, number 1, they've got to go home immediately, self-isolate. Number 2, the business has to by law report themselves to the health and safety executive. There is a straight no argument £20,000 fine for anyone who doesn't do that. You can almost guarantee it's going to trigger a visit to look at the infection control and personal hygiene and social distancing rules you've put in. So yeah, if someone is in the office and they've got symptoms, you've got to report yourself. Let me put this correctly actually. If they have symptoms and then have a test, because everyone's got to be tested now when they show symptoms, and the test is they have COVID, you then have to report yourselves. If the test is negative, then no, it's just
then no.
Yeah.
Where would they go for that test? You know, like what would actually happen next? So they say they have symptoms. Like, what does the office or the operations manager
Well, this is
do?
the problem at the moment. It's mainly privately where this is happening. There are stations set up. A lot of this depends on the borough and councils that you're now sort of setting. Some of them. So where I live in Surrey, I can go and get free testing tomorrow if I need to, if I think I've been exposed to it. So it all depends on the categories. But no, very sadly, many people can't be tested for working in a normal office, which is why if someone does show symptoms and they do stay off for 2 weeks, it's probably the better option to report yourselves, because if that person, if it later transpires they had COVID or someone connected to them had COVID, yeah, it's going to cause quite big problems. But the government has set up lots of test stations in certain boroughs, so it shouldn't be a problem if you Google it.
And if it were not available in your borough, who would be responsible for the cost of that testing?
At the minute, it's the employer, but that's not it's not no, there's no obligation for the employer to do that at this point. Okay. Obligatory. That's it.
Thank you.
There's a couple of I'm guessing the officers with less space who've talked about you know, if you've done all you can to physically distance people, but say for example between desks there's only one way in and out. How do you mitigate against that? Is that a mask wearing situation or?
Yeah, it is. It's that simple. If people are going to be 1 meter plus, they've got to be wearing a mask.
Right. So I think that's going to affect a lot of companies who don't have that square footage to spread people out.
It is. It really is. And the claims, like I say, I can't stress this enough. It's going to be easier than PPI, because all they will say to the business is, show us your risk assessment to mitigate against that. And if it doesn't exist, they've won. So that is going to cause major problems. I'm working with a lot of businesses right now where staff are refusing to wear masks, muzzles. I don't know where this trendy term for them has come from, but they won't wear them in the office. They're refusing to socially distance. It's actually, I'm staggered actually as to how many calls I'm receiving about employees not honouring and respecting what's been put in place by that risk assessment, because if that's not managed and disciplined, it's still the responsibility of the directors within the
director. Yeah. So you haven't enforced that behaviour, you haven't disciplined against that behaviour.
Exactly. I mean, pubs at the moment, if you go to a pub, if you need to go to the toilet, you're meant to be wearing a mask, because you're going to walk past people and be less than 2 meters. So yeah, it's very odd.
Someone's just popped into the chat, and I think this is indicative of how the mixed messages coming out are just not helping at all. Hancock has just said you don't have to wear masks in the office, as it doesn't have the same impact in shops and on the tube.
Yeah, I heard that this afternoon. So basically the argument is that the mask is only designed to mitigate if you have some short contact with someone, like in a shop or a tube, but in the office, no. But I guess that's what you're saying about if you're passing in a like too small a space in a corridor or something like that. I mean, I think it's probably a relief to everybody that we're not having to wear masks all the time working, because I think it would really affect productivity. But that is confusing, isn't it?
If everyone's 2 meters apart, they'll never have to wear a mask.
Okay. Could I just
on public transport, so they've had to do this blanket policy of you've all got to wear it on public transport. The only time you ever have to wear a mask in the office is if people are less than 2 meters.
Yeah, which unfortunately loads of people are ignoring on public transport anyway, but don't pull at that thread in London.
They are, but yeah, there'll be repercussions.
Just to quickly go back to what you were talking about a moment ago, because we had a follow-up question about the, you know, if you're someone in your business is tested and they test positive, having said that they have symptoms, and you've reported it, does the office have to close then? What does the office manager?
No, not at all. So you have to take reasonable precautions. So we have to look at who that person's been exposed to and maybe ask those people. But if you've got, and this is where the sort of the cool bit, if you can call it that, comes in. If you've been doing 2 meters distancing anyway, it's highly unlikely anyone will have caught it. And if you're doing the infection control and cleaning the touch points, it is literally almost impossible, or figuratively I should say impossible, for someone to then contract it. So no, you shouldn't have to close unless it transpires that person's gone on a bit of a rampage and they've been touching everything and everyone. So no, you should be relatively safe in that scenario.
Another one into the chat. So we've moved desks this week from 2 meters to 1 meter apart. Is the guidance that 1 meter plus only in mitigating circumstances on the HSE website?
Yeah. So what mitigating circumstances means essentially is you have to have something in between the people and the virus if you're going to go down to 1 meter. So in that scenario, everyone must wear masks all the time, all day.
So that's like the physical screens. The we've seen some quite funky temporary ones this week with the screens, and
we're getting a lot of that. They've got to be quite big because this is an aerial. This is aerial. So you'll notice in the supermarkets, they're not doing them from the bottom up. Some are, but most of them are doing from the top down. So you've got to get quite a lot of perspex up. It has to be cleaned. So it's possible to do it that way. It's possible to sort of almost have people in sort of booths like that. And we've got clients doing that. It's just you need a lot of training, risk assessments and processes in place.
And is there any, because someone asked this as well, and I noticed it in our the lobby of our service building. There's obviously a screen where the receptionist is, but it doesn't seem that high. Like, is that something that would be tackled in an inspection, that, you know, your perspex screen is at your reception desk isn't actually a good enough barrier?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. It depends on how sort of tall the person is. But yeah, because they need to be quite well protected from it. It can't just sort of go to about here kind of thing. It's got to be a fairly high piece of perspex. And the problem you've got with that is perspex is a fairly light material. So the higher it goes, the more it starts bending. So now things have to support it. On a practical level, it's hard to install. So it could have been that they couldn't get it much higher, and that was their mitigating circumstance. It's all going to boil down to what's in that risk assessment and why they've done it, because ultimately we're in uncharted waters now. So as long as if there is a prosecution, you can say to a judge, we knew about that, we've written about it, and this was what the conclusion we came to. If that judge agrees with you, it's fine. If they don't, then sadly it's going to be classed as a criminal offence. It's quite unfair, fundamentally, how these criminal prosecutions are going to go, because people are going to be prosecuted for a criminal offence that has never existed before.
Yeah. I guess this question comes into that sort of cohorting piece about having groups of staff, but some companies are saying if you cannot get to work without using public transport, then don't come in. But are you then creating you know, an HR issue from, you know, fairness, etc., etc.?
It is tricky, because what happens if someone who normally drives in their car says, I've sold my car and I want to get public transport now? That person's got to be allowed to work from home. So you can end up with lots of people working from home. The way we would suggest you get around it is, as part of your risk assessment, designate certain people to work from home. And if it happens to be most of the people on public transport, but we can justify that productivity hasn't dropped and they can do the same job from home, the company's allowed to do whatever it wants. Businesses can have as many home workers as they choose. That's up to them. So yeah, they can do it that way, but just do it slightly differently. So rather than announce public transport aren't coming, we keep that bit hidden as part of the risk assessment. And the conclusion is certain people will continue to work from home, certain people will work in the office.
I think we touched on this in our last session, but I think it's worth covering again. What training does the employer need to give the person who's appointed to be the competent person? So what do they need to have demonstrated? So
you need to have the relevant qualifications, knowledge and experience in order to fulfill the role. So it has to be some sort of ongoing support. So one thing that is often missed is that the competent person must have access to competent advice. So you can't just send somebody on a training course and say, you're now a competent person. They have to have access at any time to advice from a legally trained professional or someone who is qualified within health and safety. That is a legal requirement once you've got 5 employees anyway. So generally that person would have some sort of training course every couple of years. IOSH and NEBOSH are quite good courses. We do it a little bit differently to those. Ours is ongoing and we visit you on site and we do it that way. And then that needs to be topped up generally. So there's no set answer to that. If you have someone who's done the health and safety in offices for the last 30 years, they've certainly got the relevant training and experience to do it. They may need some skills from yourself, and they may need some extra support. So everybody's different. There's no set answer to that question.
And do you think there's going to be a sort of onus on people to have undertaken some sort of COVID secure office training? I mean, is that going to be a sort of mitigating circumstance if there is an inspection or there is something that goes wrong?
That's an offence not to give it. So if you've not given that training, then they're going to fine you. And the problem is with the health and safety executive, so they will fine you for every offence that they discover, but they also charge you £157 for every hour they've been on your site. So it can be quite expensive not having those in place. But yeah, that COVID-19 training is a legal requirement before anyone can step foot in the business. So already we're seeing companies getting everybody in to do the training, and they're going to be exposed to very large claims in about 2 or 3 years when people start saying, were you asked to go back into work before you had COVID training? This will just be the new, have you ever had an accident at work? Have you been in work without being given COVID?
You were saying about the almost like the equivalent of the PPI claims. There'll be huge campaigns running to, no win, no fee lawyers, etc.
There already is. There's TV adverts on in the morning now. There's adverts on the radio. Do you feel safe going into work? Have you been asked to go into work for COVID? Would you like to check if you've been furloughed correctly? Would you like the 20% back? Because you've got to write letters and get permission from everyone to furlough them. So the claims industry born from this, I personally believe is going to be bigger than anything we've ever seen. PPI was a hangover from the recession in the noughties, the 2000s. This is going to be born and dominated by that, and it's going to last for a very long time because PPI was limited, very much limited with mortgages. This is limited to everybody with a job, significantly more people, significantly more.
Just checking that we've covered all these questions. Was there anything in particular, Matthew, that you've learned in the last couple of weeks that you feel is really relevant to share here, either from working with other companies or having access that you do to the HSE updates, etc.?
Yeah, for me, it's two things. You've got to keep a record of everything. Expect to be challenged. You will be challenged by the health and safety executive. They're going to come into your office at some point. They are coming to see everybody. Managed offices are a dream come true for them because you've got to make 10 targets a day. I could go in a managed office tomorrow and see 10 companies in half an hour. So managed offices are going to be big targets, as is anybody on the high street. So get your records, but also it's essential. I mean, again, it's a legal requirement if you've got 5 staff or more. You need to subscribe to some form of service that is going to tell you when the law has changed. Because if you don't, and the law changes, they will prosecute you for not having something adequate in place. So the two big things that I'm seeing is not people not keeping records and people having actually no idea of updates. There are some directors in companies getting all of their updates from Sky News when they come through on their phone, and they are missing 95% of what needs to be done, sadly.
No, it's quite frightening that there isn't regular uptake of the new law. I mean, like you were mentioning in the last health and safety call we had about the RIDOR guidance being almost updated on the sly. No announcement going, no special announcement going out, just this communicable diseases section being put in. And no one really knew about it. So
no, and this is the problem. If it's that thing that the HSE said. If businesses do not make this their number one priority, we're going to get you. It really is that simple. Every director now has to say, right, whatever we're doing, we need to stop, and we need to get our records and training in place for COVID. Because sadly, I can help every single person in this forum now at this point. If anyone gets caught out or gets prosecuted, there's absolutely nothing I can do. Absolutely nothing I can do because it's happened at that point. And whatever they discover, whatever they throw at you, sadly, the company has to pay that. at least the way I do it, is if you are discovered to have not been COVID-19 secure and you get a spot check, I pay the fine, not you. I turn up to court and defend rather than you having to get a solicitor to do so. So seeing as this stuff's a legal requirement anyway, and there needs to be some form of an investment made, although you don't have to use me, it would be very wise to use a company who puts their money where their mouth is and says, well, if you do get caught for this and you do get a fine and you are told what you've done isn't quite correct, at least we'll take the responsibility for that and the liability.
Yeah. And in a similar vein, and I think we touched on this last time as well, about people in work from home setups, the employer is responsible for the health and safety of that employee, whether they're working from home or working in the office. So that desk assessment is really important.
It is.
We talked about some templates and actions from that in our last call. So the people that are wondering about that's something else that Matthew's company can help with those workstation assessments, or getting you trained up to do those workstation assessments properly, because it's vital if you've got people working from home. They have to be, they can't, you can't have people claiming for back injuries because you've not done that desk assessment.
That's it. And it's not just the back injury, it's the shoulder injuries, neck. And again, it's a health and safety offence. And what people need to appreciate is, as boring as it is, and eye rolly that it is, it's criminal law. You need to take health and safety far more seriously than you have to do your contracts. If you're making sure everyone in your company gets a contract and all their rights are met, but you're not following health and safety law, you're doing the priorities the completely wrong way around. Because with employment law, it's statutory fines. The maximum usually, unless you've discriminated and broken the law, it's 4 weeks of that person's salary. That's all you'll get fined. If the health and safety executive are there for 10 hours, if they're there with you for the day, you're getting fined £1,570 straight off the bat before they find anything in place. So yeah, just make it your priority. You don't have to use me, but make it your priority. And if you know for a fact there's no competent person in your business, really lobby your director and say, look, we have to do this. It's law. I found out it's criminal law. You can get into a lot of serious trouble if we don't put something in place now before the staff come back. I would honestly be urging any office manager, because the directors, many of them will expect them to be told that. Many of them will think, well, I've given you this job to make sure that we maintain and meet all of these different standards. So don't necessarily take it as a given that they're aware of this and you're waiting for them to tell them. Go back and tell them this is criminal law. They're really getting hot on this. I think we should look at putting something in place. And if you want to have a chat with me about that, feel free. If you want to explore other people and other options, feel free. The main thing is that you let your directors know this needs to happen now. It should have happened anyway from the 11th of May. That's why they're coming out with all of this language.
Okay, great. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to open the floor. Did anyone have any questions that they haven't had covered in this session? Or does anyone, in fact, want to share any experiences they've had recently with either risk assessments or the questions that you're getting asked by staff? Someone's put in, where do we get this COVID-19 training? There's lots of companies that offer it. Matthew's company is one of them. And I think, Matthew, like last time, you're happy to have a one-to-one consultations with companies.
Anyone on this forum now, if we have a one-to-one consultation, there's two key things I can show you. Every press statement released by the health and safety executive, so you can see what is required, but I can show you the risk assessment for an office. I will go through it all and just show you the level of detail that you need to basically tune into. The IOSH, just to answer the question, I can see the IOSH Managing Safely St. John's Ambulance. It is a good course for health and safety, but it's not going to do things like teach you about the psychology of people in a burning building. It's certainly not going to tell you anything about infection control and personal hygiene. So it's good as a base course, but don't just take that course and then say, right, now I'm allowed to be the competent person, because there's the support and competent advice is also a requirement. But IOSH is good, so is NEBOSH. They're two very good ones to take.
Seeing if anything else has popped up here. I think that there were a couple of people who were happy to say a little bit about what they've done so far. I don't know if they're still on the call. Can Cindy hear me? I know you were having technical issues earlier, but I think
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Hi.
You've got some people back in the office, haven't you, or about to have some people back in the office?
No, we don't have anyone back as yet, but we are definitely very thick in the planning process of trying to bring some people back into the office. So we have basically set up everything. We've done a deep sanitization clean of the office. We've done our social distancing of the 2 meters between desks for everyone. We have all of our signage up showing meeting rooms are closed, these desks are off limits and you can't sit at them, kind of thing. We have all of our sanitation wipes, everything basically out there. We've made our coffee machines touchless so that people can make their coffee from their mobile phone as opposed to having to touch it. But if they did want to touch it, we do have sanitization wipes that are by the coffee machines, along with gloves as well, if people would like to use them. One of the big things I know that I had learned along the way was making sure that we had proper bins to dispose of the PPE. So I'm not sure if that's something other people have thought of. And so we have them strategically placed around the floor so people can dispose of PPE properly. We've set up to do temperature screening first thing in the morning just to make sure people are okay. We have a bio sweep that's been done. So that's a huge clean of the office that basically protects the hard surfaces. So it's kind of like a kill on contact. So if anybody touched that, it would kill any microbes. So again, just another layer to protect our employees when they're on site. The risk assessment we haven't done yet. I do have the template of it drawn up, and it probably is around 9 to 10 pages as well. So I feel a bit okay about that, but I wouldn't mind getting that double checked. And that we're going to do just before we reopen the office and we have everything in place. And then our plan is probably a bit OCD, but it's to do that again in 2 weeks' time. Like once we've got people that are in the office and they're using the space, to redo that assessment and just keep an eye on how the space is being used with people that are coming back in. Are they using it in the correct manner and so on? Do we need to make any adjustments, add additional signage? You know, what is it that we need to do? So our plan is just to constantly keep on it, do these risk assessments every 2 weeks to make sure that from a business, we're seen to be doing the right thing.
Matthew's making all the positive signals there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And I guess, Cindy, what, if you don't mind us asking, have you set up some sort of like cohorting? Like, are you limiting the amount of people in the office? Have you had to think about that as part of the risk assessment?
Yeah, definitely. So the approach that I've passed on to management is it should be a phased entry where we bring in 25% first, and then we just gradually build on it. But it's all going to be dependent on the risk assessment. And this is why I was saying that's key for us and why we're doing it every 2 weeks. So if I do it in 2 weeks' time and it's like, okay, we can't have any more people back in, then we don't allow any more people back in. If I do it in a month's time and it's like, okay, everyone's learned how to use the space, we've got all these things in place now and it's all working great, then yeah, like let's increase it. Let's bring in the next wave of people and just gradually build it up so that we're not putting the business at risk or any people at risk as well. Like that's the big concern. I want to make sure that nobody's coming in there contracting COVID and getting sick, because then when they go home, who's at home with them? You know, we don't want anyone to get ill, and that's the main aim of this.
That all sounds very sensible, that you're looking at the kind of holistic, the well-being as well. It's, yes, there's the legal obligation, but you know, there's the moral obligation to make sure people are safe.
Yeah, this is it. I think apart from the temperature testing, I mean, that's all a legal requirement. Everything that, forgive me, I think you said Cindy, everything Cindy has done, this is just par for the course. This is normal. Yeah. So if you know, heart of hearts, you're not doing this in your offices, you're not compliant. It is that simple. And I'm not trying to say this for any other reason, that if I don't say this, I'm doing every single person in this forum an injustice and I would be misleading them.
So we've, I know a few people have asked about template risk assessment documents, which I think you're happy to share on consultation. So that's definitely something that you can do. we will circulate the key points from this call as before. It's been great to have your contribution, Cindy. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts or experiences they wanted to share. Has there been anything that surprised you, or anything that you've has taken much longer than expected, or been more difficult to implement than expected? I can't see anyone's hands up here, but as all of our OMQ sessions, if there are any follow-up questions that you want covering, please feel free to direct those via Jen. Jen will be more than happy to set up a call with Matthew. We'll circulate your details as normal, Matthew. So if that's everything, we can...
I think it may be. I just want to say, Nicole has just left one quick question, which I think is a really good question. I think it's a nice one to end on. Do first aiders need to learn COVID-19 skills? My question would be, it's going to be very difficult to resuscitate somebody with a 2-meter social distance. So yes, every single first aid policy will now have to be updated. There's special equipment you will need to buy. You can't just do standard resuscitation now. It's going to spread the infection. So yeah, everybody's first aid policy will need to be revised and updated. And again, it's those magic words. Until you've done the risk assessment, you're not going to know how.
Wow, it's a lot, isn't it?
the subsections of this, you know, it's literally is a rabbit hole. It's like Alice in Wonderland. There's so many different facets to this, and they all have these little offshoots. So yeah, I'm more than happy to consult with anybody to say, this is my office, what do I have to do in there? And I can show you everything that's got to be done.
Okay, perfect. Well, I would guess that there's probably a mixture of people, some people feeling quite reassured about things they've got in place, a few people who are feeling quite lost and maybe potentially panicking. That's fine, as long as you don't have people in the office at the moment, that's fine, but let's get those risk assessments done ASAP if you've got any plans bring people back. And for me, the big piece is that training, getting the staff trained before return. I think there'll be quite a few companies that have got very thorough risk assessments in place but haven't actually imparted any of that yet. So yeah, and it's a shame, because anyone who was in to the office before training there's nothing you can do now to stop that. It's just hoping that they don't make it. That's it. So yeah, so for anyone in here who has got staff and you want them to return, please put the training in place. It's only going to be a PPI claim in 2 years for everybody. It really is. Okay, thanks so much again for your time, Matthew, and thanks for offering to do those one-to-ones as well. And
thank you, Cindy, for joining in as well. That was fun.
That was great. Thank you. And please do follow up if you've got anything that didn't get covered today. We'll gladly chase that up for you and get templates out to you.
We have a few people here that will have done some interesting thinking around the actual planning of getting people back in the office. And someone had asked the questions about, you know, is there a funky app or something? Maybe that's something we all need to invent, and then, like, you know, we can benefit from this. But maybe we can discuss that in the LinkedIn group. Because it'd be so amazing if you were willing to share resources and we can all benefit each other, you know. So I'll put something in group and see if we can get some templates and ideas uploaded, because I mean, I think it's fair to say there's no right or wrong with how you're planning people to come back, right? There's as long
as it's safe to do so. But you're right, there's different apps that I've seen popping up about planning staff cohorting so that people can kind of check in, so you can see who's physically there. And
well, one thing I will interject with, and I can show this to anybody who I do a consultation with, we've actually got a piece of software, Back to Work Navigator, that automates that whole process for you. So at any time you can see who's at home, who's in the office. Works really, really well.
That's fab. That literally answers one of the questions. I think that sort of thing will be a huge peace of mind for people. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.